about what consent means to each of you.
To me, I view consent as just like a basis of respect, just valuing a person and what they say and respecting their body and not taking any of that out of assumption.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that, and adding on to that of respecting someone's willingness to do something, whether it be in a relationship of trying to go the next step or not wanting to, and just understanding that people have different levels of what they want to do and waiting, or just it never happening, and that's a perfectly alright thing to have.
And another thing is kind of just really listening to the person, and if they say no, that means no, no matter if they're saying it in like a joking way or they like quote unquote like leading them on. Like if they say no, you have to stop.
Yeah.
I think an extra piece is also about feeling comfortable enough to say no, where you're not put in a situation where you're supposed to say yes, so you do, but you have that voice and you have that confidence to stand up for yourself when you're not comfortable.
Yeah. I also wanted to say I think it's cool that a while ago they started campaigning that also yes means yes, that just because they don't explicitly say no doesn't mean someone wants to participate in anything. So I think that's a really important thing as well.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking about. I feel like it's such like a multifaceted thing. Like it doesn't come down to one word. Like even things I've been learning about recently, like body language, or like different indicators that like it's like, well, they didn't say no, and it's like, yeah, but they didn't like say yes. It's interesting because I feel like it's like a double-edged sword. Like even the topic of like sexual assault, like it's like we're so exposed to it in a sense that like we're desensitized to it, but at the same time it's like this thing that's like super taboo in society. So it's like we're almost like too accustomed to it that it's like normalized. Yeah, we're still so unwilling to like talk about it because it is like uncomfortable, and with that comes like accountability and all these other complex things. Why do you guys think consent is important?
I think consent comes into our lives every day, whether it's seeing someone and they come in for a hug when you might not be comfortable with physical touch. There's just so many ways that consent comes in, your ability to say yes or no for what you want. I mean, even kids on the playground need to learn how to say yes and no for themselves and stand up for themselves. So I think it's just something that's so far-reaching that we need to talk about it more and more.
Do you all feel like sexual assault is a prominent issue?
Yes.
Why?
I think it's one of the most pressing issues because it like encompasses just the very basis of like what I consider like the basis of humanity, like our own control of our own bodies and our like our own selves. And to me, when you take that control away from somebody else and you say, no, you don't have power over your body, you don't have say over what you get to do, like that power is mine now. I think that is one of the most detrimental things that can happen because it takes away from who that person is. And it's a lot bigger than it is on the surface. And it destroys people. And I think that that's one of the biggest problems that needs to be addressed.
Yeah, it's not one of those things that just goes away after it happens. It is a lifelong struggle for people. They experience significant trauma because of it, which is something that they carry with them every single day. It weighs on people's hearts, and we need to do something about it.
My name is Tracy Darling DeMarcus. I am the Community Engagement Specialist for the Women's and Children's Alliance. My role with the WCA is primarily responsible for our prevention education program, which means I am going out in the community with my team, and trying to educate adults and young people and children on kind of the issue areas that we work within, and also trying to break the cycle of violence, and hoping that there will be a generation of people that will not need the WCA to exist. So I guess my job is trying to put myself out of a job. So there's lots of myths about why people think other people get sexually assaulted or why people are sexually assaulted. A lot of it is based in our culture and in our society that makes people think that if somebody does a certain thing or dresses a certain way, they deserve to be treated like that, or that they deserve to be assaulted, and that's just not the case. The responsibility for abusive behavior and assault is always on the person who's doing those behaviors, and it's never on the victim. There's also this kind of stranger in the bushes type of attitude that sexual assault only happens by somebody that you don't know who jumps out of a dark alley at you and attacks you, but the majority of sexual assaults happen by somebody who is known to the victim. Unfortunately, it's very, very common. Every 98 seconds, an American citizen is sexually assaulted. So that's a ton of people. And 1 in 3 women and 1 in 6 men will experience some sort of physical sexual assault in their lifetime. So if you just think about, the number of people you know, the number of people you go to school with, that you work with, that's a huge amount of people who are experiencing these things. And again, 8 in 10 of those cases, the victim knew the perpetrator. So these are people who were involved in their lives in some way. There's no one person or circumstance, that that is a sexual assault victim or survivor. One of the biggest things that we try to combat as far as that goes, perception-wise, is that sometimes people think that, again, certain behaviors or certain things make it so, somebody puts themselves in a situation where they're going to get assaulted, or, there's, again, that mentality of well, you should do something to protect yourself, when really people shouldn't be assaulting other people regardless of the circumstances, whether they were drinking or whatever. People should not be assaulting other people. If people come to us with experiences, we need to believe them, we need to support them, we need to figure out how to help them, how to get them to move forward in healing from that experience. That's all I got for that.
Because I feel oftentimes people, on both ends of things, what you're talking about, people are scared to speak up because it's how will other people react, and will people believe me, just based on history and all these kinds of things we see in the media. And then on the other end of things, I also feel it's kind of taboo because people are how do I react when this has happened to someone?
Right.
So it brings challenges.
On both sides of it, like you said.
Yeah.
I think a lot of film and stuff depicts sort of this image of this is what a sexual assault survivor looks like. It's a white woman who was walking home at night without her friends in a dark alley and was sexually assaulted. And that I think leads to so many misconceptions, as far as it's more frequent that someone that the person knows sexually assaults them than certainly stranger sexual assault happens as well, but it's more common that it's not a stranger. And along with that, there's also just the piece of as just thinking about minorities and Native American women, the rates of sexual assault amongst Native American women is just insanely higher than it is for like white women. And the more I think you go and look at like minority groups and like people of color and LGBTQ folks, like the stats like for maybe like the white woman like are so much greater for anybody who has any sort of like minority status or like any sort of like marginalized place in our society too. Like people with disabilities, like the rates of sexual assault are so much higher. It certainly does affect like white women as well, but like so many other people who don't have the same level of power. Yeah, there are like common effects and common experiences, but at the same time, like there is like no one type of survivor. Yeah. Pretty much no one's gonna fit into this box of a sexual assault survivor, and so kind of recognizing that even though it may be common to experience this, they might be experiencing something like totally different.
So I'm Jennifer Richards, or Jenny Richards, people call me, and I'm a clinician here at WCA. So really individuals have a range of symptoms or effects after the aftermath of sexual assault. So, you know, it can look like a lot of different things based on the person, based on the experience, based on kind of how people even respond to that person after the fact. And so, you know, sexual assault is a traumatic event, and so symptoms common to post-traumatic stress disorder are common. Things such as fear, loss of control, the inability to, you know, regulate the nervous system, so the inability to calm themselves down after, you know, maybe a car honks its horn or something. That can be a triggering incident. Things like intrusive memories, so traumatic memory is big. Things like in the community can be triggers for somebody who has experienced sexual assault. Also, some common symptoms like anxiety and depression as well.
My name is Caitlin Lanier. I have my master's in social work, so by day I work as a therapist for children, and then in like my spare time on evenings or on weekends I teach yoga for survivors of trauma. I've worked with both like children survivors of child sexual abuse, and then also with more like adult women who've experienced sexual assault. So kind of in both those capacities, like both as a therapist and as a yoga teacher.
Can you talk about the effects that sexual assault can have on someone's relationship with their body?
Bessel van der Kolk is a really well-known like trauma researcher, and he has a quote. It's something about like basically the body becoming like the scene of the crime. And so there can be such a common response of people like not trusting their bodies anymore, feeling like their bodies have let them down, dissociation also, which we could kind of define that, like you could think of that sort of as like the mind, spirit, soul kind of escaping the body. So it's like someone may be like physically present in a room, but their mind is somewhere very, very different. Or maybe even like feeling like super disconnected from your body, like not able to kind of pick up on like different sensations in the body, like an overwhelming sense of kind of numbness of like, yeah, like I'm here in my head, but like from like the rest neck down, like there's like nothing going on. So for that piece too, I think the ability to engage in self-care is so challenging too, of like listening to the body's cues of like hunger or thirst or needing rest. Like I think overworking can be super common amongst sexual assault survivors as well, of like sort of like I'm not comfortable being still or being in a space of rest, and so I'm gonna sort of like distract myself and work super, super, super insanely hard to kind of help me feel better. You could think of overwork almost like being sort of a drug in its own way, just because like just being with your body and listening to your body is such a troublesome, challenging experience for sexual assault survivors.
What are some primary coping mechanisms people use after a trauma such as sexual assault?
You could kind of think of coping mechanisms as like they might be like in the short term like really powerful and really effective, however in the long term maybe not so effective. And I would say some of those like really short term coping mechanisms might be like anything from substance use, alcohol, drugs, that type of thing, to like self-harm is really common. And then you could think of it even in terms of overeating, like undereating, eating disorders. I think there's definitely like a co-occurring aspect to trauma within eating disorders. I think also like isolation you could think of as being like a coping mechanism. You cannot trust other people. Like your brain sort of rationally goes like, okay, well then about the only person I can trust then is myself. So I'm gonna sort of batten down the hatches and just keep to myself because that is one thing I can guarantee like for my own safety. And the addiction piece too, I think like to really like try and normalize it, like trauma can have like there's so much study, like Bessel van der Kolk talks so much about it too in terms of like trauma like truly affects people on like a cellular level. There's been so many different like brain imaging studies done that just talk about how like people who have experienced trauma, like their brains like from a like visceral level like look different from people who have not experienced trauma. And part of it is like there's like so much more activity in the amygdala, which I'm putting to like right here because that's kind of right where it is in our brain. It's this small like almond shaped structure that's like really like you could think of the amygdala as being responsible for keeping us safe. Like it's sort of like the smoke detector of our brains. Like it's constantly like scanning our environment, just checking things out to see like are we safe or is something else going on. And so when people have experienced trauma, the amygdala like remembers that experience so profoundly and is like constantly scanning the environment to try and make sure nothing like that ever happens again. And so with that like amygdala activity comes like a lot of hyperarousal. And so it's like bodies are like constantly like being prepared for like fighting or flighting, like knowing that perhaps something could always be happening. And so like for that sort of experience, like having some sort of like downer like alcohol or marijuana or something is it makes sense. Like the body is so in that state of like needing something to come down from that that's super common that those things are happening. On the flip side too, like people can experience more like kind of the depression side of thing from trauma and stuff where it's more like mimicking kind of the freeze response where like there's lethargy and just like lack of motivation, a hard time concentrating, just like a lot of like overwhelming feelings of sadness. So with all of that, like you can kind of see also within like addictions and stuff like why there could also be sort of the tendency towards more like uppers and stuff like cocaine or methamphetamine or something like that. So there's definitely like that intersection between kind of addictions and trauma. Some common themes that I've seen for people who have either experienced like child sexual abuse or sexual assault are like really intense feelings of like embarrassment or shame. Some other things also feelings of like regret or like even like blaming oneself for what happened. Super common for people to feel like it's their fault or that like a really common response to if like you're talking about trauma, often if you're faced with a really like highly stressful experience, like your body has kind of one of three things it may do or a combination of them of either fighting to try and like thwart the experience, fleeing, like running away, trying to escape the experience, or freezing. And freeze is kind of an interesting response in that like the body kind of almost mimics mimics death as a way of sort of like preserving yourself as you're going through something really terrible. So freeze is actually a super common response that people have to sexual assault, where the brain in sort of a not like a cognitive or conscious sort of way has already figured out maybe like fleeing isn't really going to work, that's not an option here, fighting isn't going to work, that's not an option here, and so I'm left with sort of my last resort of like freezing and not doing anything. So with that response, I think a lot of people then sort of have an experience of like blaming themselves, of feeling like, oh, I should have like fought harder, or I should have tried to run away, or I should have done like a number of things. Along those same lines too, I think society really can reinforce some of those problems for survivors too, like of people asking maybe questions of survivors of sexual assault, like, oh, well, like what outfit were you wearing when it happened? Like, were you wearing like a short skirt? Or, oh, like why weren't you using the buddy system to walk home? Like, why were you alone? Or why were you out after dark? Or, you know, why didn't you like keep an eye on your drink so it couldn't get like roofied or whatnot? So I think society too like asks some of those questions too, of like, why didn't you do X, Y, and Z in order to protect yourself? Which I guess it's a bit of a segue, but I guess that sort of begs the question in a lot of ways too, of like, why are we asking those questions of survivors of the sexual assault instead of asking like perpetrators, like also like, why did you do that? Trauma like is so damaging in some ways, and healing isn't just gonna happen like over the course of a year. Like one of my really good friends always says, like healing is a non-linear process. Like it's almost like in some ways like kind of like layers of an onion or something too. Like you may like peel back one layer, only to find like that there's another layer and another layer and another layer. And so it really is like a lifelong healing process.
So healing, like I said, like the experience is different for everybody. Healing can look different as well. So it really affects your emotions, it affects your psychology, it affects your body, and so it affects relationships. So healing can be kind of, you know, it can take time. Healing can happen in a short amount of time, or it can take a long period of time for healing. You know, I think having supportive people around is a great resource for healing. Somebody that you can talk to, such as a therapist or, you know, professional help, is really important in this healing process. But really, I think people who you know, have experienced a traumatic incident such as sexual assault, they can often lose touch with kind of reality and lose touch with their emotions and what their experience is. And so it can be helpful for a therapist or a helpful friend to help people recognize what they're feeling in their body, what they're feeling emotionally and experiencing. Yeah.
So yeah, I would say like we're at kind of an exciting time right now in the world, where for a while it was just sort of like the idea of like, okay, so you've experienced sexual assault, okay, go to counseling, well, go report it to the police and go to the ER and then go to counseling and then just continue on with your life, I guess, for however long. But with, and referencing back to like Bessel van der Kolk, our trauma guy, like just so much of the research he's done just on the effect of trauma on the body has, I think, really validated, I think, a lot of maybe more intuitive senses from kind of more like yoga people or massage people, like who might be perceived as being a little bit like hippy-dippy or something like that. But his perspective is really that like you have to bring the body into healing, and he like kind of has two concepts of like you can either heal trauma from like the top down or from the body up, and the top down perspective means like sort of from like the mind brain like down to the body, or the bottom up is meaning more like you start with the body and you work your way up to the mind, and the like what that means more or less is you're sort of like, you're working with like sort of the basic functions of the body, like you're working with the breath, like you're working on relaxation, you're working on just like at a basic level, like reconnecting with your body. I like to think of it as like, yeah, certainly like therapy is a great modality for healing from trauma, but like also like there are so many other like complementary things, maybe simultaneous to counseling. There's so many other ways that you can really work with the body, like in the healing experience. Like it doesn't just have to be one type of thing.
Help can look like different things for different people. And so help can be, you know, a friend or a parent who is really supportive, or help could be a therapist who can walk you through, you know, some processing of these traumatic events and learn some new coping skills. Help can be coming to a support group or telling your story at a platform. You know, I think help can be different for everybody, depending on the person and their experience and, you know, what that means to them.
Can you talk a little bit about the resources that the Women and Children's Alliance provides?
Sure. So we provide safety, healing, and freedom from domestic abuse and sexual assaults. Some of the biggest programs that we offer are our Safe Shelter, if that's an emergency shelter that we operate here in the Treasure Valley. We also have 2 24-hour hotlines. One is a hotline for sexual assault in particular. It's available 24 hours a day, totally free, totally confidential, to speak with an advocate. We also do safety planning, which is a really important component to making somebody feel safe after they've possibly been assaulted, because a lot of times that feeling of safety has been taken from them. Court advocacy if somebody needed to seek a protection order. Also, one of the most important healing pieces is our counseling program. We have totally free counseling available for women, men, children, anybody who has experienced assault or abuse can receive counseling at absolutely no cost to start that healing process or continue that healing process depending on where they're at.
I'm Bridget Beeples, and I am the outreach manager for Speak Your Silence. So we are a local nonprofit, and we're here to bring voice, value, and worth back to people who've been sexually assaulted and abused. So our main goal, our main mission is really trying to break the stigma off of something that's pretty prevalent nowadays. We want people to know that, you know, they have worth, they have value regardless of what has happened in their life, and knowing that their past doesn't define their future. We were founded about 7 years ago by a local Boise guy. His name's Matt Pipkin. He had a story with sexual abuse and assault. So he was abused when he was 6 by a really close family friend for about 3 years or so. He held on to it for a really long time. He went to a counselor. He realized that his adult life was affected by something that had happened, you know, so long ago in his childhood. And so his self-esteem wasn't great. He was feeling, you know, depressed. Things weren't working out financially for him. Relationships weren't working out. And so he was so confused as to why all this was going on, but then realized it was because of what had happened when he was a child. And he had this complete life shift, really, when it came to the way that he thought about things and whatnot. And so after he had really obtained that freedom from talking through things with his counselor, he decided to start his own organization. Because, you know, if you see a need, you got to kind of fill a need in that aspect sometimes, and this is just one of those things that he had seen. And so he started this organization, Speak Your Silence, based off of his own personal experience, and basically said, you know, I want people to know that there's hope in talking about, you know, sexual abuse and assault. There's hope in that what has happened in your past, you know, you can really be freed from it if you just share your story. For a long time, it was just solely web-based, but then last year, in 2018, he was talking through one of his like event planning Friends and was like, how do we reach people in real life, not just behind a computer screen? And so then they had come up with the concept of the VW bus. And so from there, him and his wife went to Portland. They found this really cool bus and then brought it back to Boise, completely renovated it, and used it as like a pop-up essentially. So we'll sell product out of it. We get to go do cool events with people, to be able to go out into the community, to talk with people, to reach people in real time, in person.
The resources that are available, range from community to community. So our community, the WCA, the Women's and Children's Alliance, is a great resource for this kind of thing. We offer free counseling, we offer free support groups, we offer emergency shelter for those that are in need of that. But there's also things in the community like Speak Your Silence, which is a nonprofit organization that helps people in the healing process of telling their story and can also get them counseling if needed. There's online websites such as RAIN, which is the Rape, Abuse, Incest National Network, and they provide support as well. So whether that's resources or information, just things like that.
Trauma is so much about disconnect with yourself, with your own soul, with your own body, with your own mind. Also a disconnection with other people, and then a disconnection with the rest of the world at large. And so if you think about sexual assault as well, like it so frequently happens like in the context of relationships, perhaps with someone you know. Like certainly sexual assault happens by strangers as well, but often it's with perhaps an acquaintance or someone that you have a pre-existing relationship with. And so when there is such a severe violation within a relationship that should be so built on trust, it makes it really hard to move forward and really like be able to trust anyone else in your life. Like there's such a big feeling of like betrayal. So like I think confusing in so many ways too, because theoretically, like we should be able to trust other people, and especially people that we're in some sort of relationship with, whether it's a family member or a friend or a partner. But if like sexual abuse or sexual assault is a part of the equation, like that just so kind of muddies the water as far. But I think by that same token too, like trauma so frequently occurs in the context of relationships, and I think relationships are so key to the healing process as well, of being able to sort of go out on a limb and trust other people and really reconnect to other people, because it can be such an isolating experience to experience like trauma, like sexual assault. And so being able to kind of forge new neural pathways in your brain and sort of rebuild after experiencing trauma is I think one of the most important ways to start healing.
How should a family member, a friend, or anyone help someone who's been affected by sexual assault?
On one hand, like some really supportive things that they could do would be in terms of like really like tangible resources, whether that's like sort of like primary response, like taking the victim to FACES for like medical assessment, like potentially like reporting to the police, like just like all of that type of thing, or like other like type of resources like therapy or counseling. And I think with both of those things too, like it's important to keep in mind that like the person may or may not want to pursue those things. Like not everybody is gonna want to report to the police. So just supporting them wherever they're at in their desires, and not like forcing them to do any such like thing. If we're talking about like trauma-informed care, like probably one of the single most important things is just all about choice, like letting survivors of trauma like make choices about like what happens to their bodies, what type of care they receive, like just the whole gamut of things. Like I think the other piece too is just like for family members and friends just to be able to be there to listen and to like validate feelings and not to be like trying to problem solve things, which I think is a really I think it's so hard to be a witness to suffering of other people. Like we so want to absolve that and fix it and make it better, but the reality of it is there's no easy fix or easy solution to the suffering.
How can someone help a friend or loved one that's been affected by sexual assault?
You know, I spoke about the resource RAIN earlier, which is the Rape, Abuse, Incest National Network, and that's a website that provides information for those that are looking to support somebody who's experienced that. I think the most important thing is that you're open. So if you can be a good listener, if you can provide non-judgmental listening, so that's not giving advice or talking about your experience, it's really just sitting and listening and being there to support that person. And then also, asking if they want resources, asking if they need help. Do they need help, or do they want anything, to help get through this process?
Let's talk a little bit about empowering people that have been affected by sexual assault. What are some ways that we can do that?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing to help people who have gone through sexual abuse and assault is to be a listening ear for them, in all honesty. I think that a lot of people just need at least one person who's going to listen to them, who believes in them, who's going to encourage them, who's going to, help them through a situation. That's a really tough situation to walk through alone. Even if it's just one person who's going to just stand with them and really be in the trenches with them. I think we need to get better at that as a human race in general, is being in the trenches with someone when they're going through something like that, where it's I might not necessarily have gone through it, but I'm going to be empathetic toward your situation. And letting them know that you believe in them is another thing, because I think there's a fear when it comes to sharing a story that when you say it, people aren't going to believe you. We just have to be people that are going to champion others and not think so much about ourselves, but come together in unity. Because that's how things are going to get done, is when we come together on a unified front.
How can we make efforts to prevent sexual assault?
I think just by educating people, again, really on what is consent, how do I have a consensual interaction with somebody, and not even just practicing consent around sex, but you can practice consent in all sorts of different ways, whether it's deciding what to do on the weekends, or holding hands or something like that. You can practice consent in all these different ways, and so just making that a normal piece of every relationship that you're in. And also just, again, speaking out against these sorts of things, creating those conversations and those spaces for people to talk about it, just opening up that space to have that conversation.
But I think if we were to just educate everyone on the long-term effects of sexual abuse and assault, if people were to even understand the psychological damage that happens with sexual abuse and assault, I think honestly that could change people's even decisions, if that was even a thought process in their mind, understanding that when someone goes through sexual abuse and assault, that it doesn't just change maybe for a moment, but that it's actually a lifelong effect. It'll change the way that you think about yourself. It'll change your day-to-day decisions. It'll change the way you have relationships with people. It'll change the way that you think about things, because something so precious got taken away, or someone has dehumanized you, or whatever it may be.
Presumably, someone would have a harder time sexually assaulting someone if they appreciated the full humanness of that person.
I'm a huge believer in the fact that as human beings, we all have this inherent value inside of us. And when something like sexual assault happens, it seems that value gets distorted or taken away in a sense. And I don't think that you should let another person have that. You shouldn't have to let that other person have that power over you.
Yeah.
I think it's important that people know, and if they've gone through something like that, to share it and to not hold on to it anymore. Because the longer you hold on to it, the harder it's going to be to share it, the more it's going to eat you up. And it's really just knowing that your voice matters, and that your life experiences matters, and that like what you do matters, and that like you matter as a person. I mean, the statistics are insane. It's like every 98 seconds someone is going through some sort of sexual abuse kind of issue, and 1 in every 6 men or boys have been abused or will be abused, and it's 1 in every 4 women who have gone through something like that. So yeah, the statistics are so high up there. So like I said, if you've not experienced it, there's a good chance that you know someone who's experienced it. So really it's doing your part and coming alongside, like I said, and partnering with those people and being a listening ear, championing those for others, and taking a stand.
That kind of leads me to my final question. How can we as individuals in society be upstanders against sexual assault?
I'd say definitely just because people make jokes about it a lot, just saying how they're not funny. And I haven't fully figured out the greatest way to do that, 'cause sometimes people say that, like I'll tell them that, and then they say it is and ask me why it's not, and they don't want to hear my full like rant about it, of how important it is. Okay, you're gonna have to sit down. But yeah, just showing that you're not okay with that, because for some people that is a dehumanizing experience for them, and that's just making light of it when it's something that affects so many people. I think it'd be so hard to hear people making jokes about it.
I think something really important is to bring awareness to it, but in a way to where you're not bringing awareness to how a girl can avoid it or what she can do to stop it, but instead bringing awareness to the people that are responsible, for the perpetrator, for the person that is going to commit it. Because the bottom line is if you teach your daughter to not do something, if you teach her not to dress a certain way or not to, walk a certain way home, I mean, yeah, those are measures to protect your daughter, but you're basically sending the message that, I don't want you to get sexually assaulted, I want it to be somebody else.
How can we as individuals in society be upstanders against sexual assault?
I think one of the biggest things we can do, again, is just talking about it, normalizing it, making people aware that we're supportive of survivors, and also calling out potentially harmful either behaviors or language when it happens. Sometimes people make like rape jokes and things like that, and I think a lot of people are uncomfortable with it but don't say anything in the moment because it doesn't seem like that big of a deal, right?
Yeah.
But if somebody's there that hears that joke and already thinks that like somebody can dress provocatively and expect to be treated that way, or they're kind of okay with it already, and nobody calls that out, that's like giving that person the green light to go and do that thing. So really just taking the time to call that sort of thing out, saying, actually, this is a really serious problem that affects a lot of people, or, I know somebody who went through that and it was really hard for them. Even just calling it out in that way can make some people who maybe didn't think anything of it before change their thoughts about it, and maybe even change their behaviors in the future.
How can we be upstanders against sexual assault?
Really just coming alongside and partnering with people who have gone through that. I think that's really important. And taking a stand. When you see a weird situation, take a stand. Make a difference. Don't just let it sweep under the rug because you're not sure if you're going to offend someone.
Knowing that the statistics of how many people have experienced sexual assault, whether it's men or women or children, that it's happening in the community, and that there is support out there, and that you can be that support, whether it's connecting somebody to a resource, or it's being that great listener, or just being there for that person, whether they're sad or scared. I think that's that's the most important part.
Absolutely. Why do you do what you do?
I do what I do because I want to make a difference in my community and for the people that I care about. Like so many people, I have very close people in my life who've been affected by both sexual assault and domestic violence, and I think it's in a way my responsibility to do as much as I can to help, again, like break that cycle, break that stigma, and really try to help as many people as possible.
I saw this like quote the other day that I keep coming back to, but basically it says, may you feel at home with your own body, may you feel safe within your own skin, and may you feel that you are more than enough just as you are right now. That's sort of like what I want for trauma survivors, like across the board.
What inspires you to do what you do? Seeing the freedom that comes with people sharing and talking. It gives me fuel. Being able to see the freedom and allow for people to really understand their worth and their value.
Why do you do what you do?
So I do what I do because I believe in the connection and the power of people, the power of that connection from person to person, and the person's ability to heal and their ability to walk through really tough situations.